Hey, welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. So glad you're listening in, tuning in, whether you're a subscriber, someone shared this with you. Glad you're here. If you're watching on YouTube, great to see you. It's still summer. I still have some color, still tan. I don't know what I'm going to do come December in the Pacific Northwest where I haven't seen some sun. I don't know. Let's just be honest. Sun is a good thing. Well, I hope it's sunny wherever you're at today listening in. And I'm so excited to share today my good friend, Dr. Sasha Shillcutt. She has a new book called Brave Boundaries. We dig into that book. We talk a lot about boundaries, not only as a leader, but also as a parent, as a person yourself, how to go through and establish boundaries and why boundaries are so imperative. I truly enjoy every time I get to chat with Sasha. I know she brings such great wisdom from her perspective, serving so many in the medical field and really giving that perspective of I'm here doing the work, leading. And that's what I always get from her. I know you're going to get that today. I'm excited for her to share. We have a great conversation, a little bit of friendly banter. You'll get into that in a couple of minutes. But again, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And as always, you get value from these episodes. I'd love it if you share me a note. Let me know what value Sasha brings to you today, whether that's through a comment, whether that's through a review, rating, wherever you're listening to it. Would love to know that just so I can share that with her, give her feedback too. So again, I'll catch you here at the end. Sasha, welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. Man, all right. I wasn't going to share this, but I'm going to share it because it really marks this connection that we have is, when you were a previous guest on my podcast, which I was so excited to get to know you, and we had a great conversation. We had some technical difficulties, and so we had to re-record. It was all right, right? And, then you have your new book out, which I'm so excited for everyone to get and to see, and that's Brave Boundaries. And so we record a podcast, and we had some technical difficulties. And so it's just our relationship. But every time you come with a smile, and I'm excited to chat with you. And so I'm excited to have another conversation with you.
I'm just honored that you invited me back because honestly, the last time that we recorded, it was like 0 dark 30 and there's a 2-hour time difference. And I felt so bad. You were accommodating my crazy schedule. And then to know that none of it recorded and you invited me back. So
I think we got like 14 seconds. I just may have to go and ask our podcast producer, Beth, to find those 14 seconds. And there may be just absolute gold in that 14 seconds that we don't know. I mean, there might be.
No, I'm just honored to be here and chat with you. It's always a good discussion, and we have so many things we can talk about.
Yeah, well, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about this idea of boundaries. One of the things that it must have been out of our conversation. I share a thought of a day, and I shared this. A river without boundaries eventually turns into a puddle.
Mm-hmm. I like it. It's true. I mean, when I think about boundaries, before I really started studying them and researching them and applying them to my life, I just thought of them as something that, was very restrictive and something for, woo-woo people that are having difficulties in conversations or relationships, not me in my everyday life. And the more I studied them, the more I realized that boundaries don't just keep negative things out of our life. They keep positive things in our life, and they really protect where and what we put our energy that is so good from becoming too much, from becoming the wrong direction, from becoming that puddle, so to speak. They keep it going the right direction. So more important than keeping maybe toxicity or drama out of your life, boundaries keep good in. And they really honestly allow you to live your priority list. That's just the most simple way for me to explain it.
You shared this, that it's the one thing you wish you were taught that you were never taught.
True. And I've gone to school for a lot of years.
You're still learning. We all are.
I'm still learning.
But if you were to go back and think about the times where you've been challenged the most, as an anesthesiologist, as a business owner, as a mother, as a wife, and think back of like, oh, if I would have known then what I know now, And then, to that perspective of how would you lead yourself differently?
That is a
What
really
would you
great
do?
question.
See, I've had some time to stew on
Yes,
this.
yes. I think
We're going to keep laughing about this. If you can't laugh about it, it doesn't matter. So I'll let you answer.
I think that there were so many times early in my career and mother and parenthood, which really were very parallel for me, both of those trajectories, becoming a parent and growing in my career, that I just wanted to please people, whether I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to be the person that showed up and always was there, always was, there for my colleagues or my patients or my kids, because that's what I equated with being a good parent, a good leader, a good doctor, a good partner. And I set such unrealistic expectations for myself. And because I was, I was really addicted to this word always, she's always there for me. She always shows up. She always succeeds. She always prepares. I had no boundaries, right? So when someone would call and ask me a question or ask me to do something, or my kids would ask me to do something, whether it was my kids or my patients or my work, I just always tried to show up because I thought that was being a good fill in the blank. And I had no idea of what it was, how empowering it would be, and actually how good it would be for me to show up in the areas of my life that I really needed to show up in if I said no, and if I said no without guilt, and if I actually had boundaries around what I would say were my priorities. So as much as I said, oh, my priorities are my health and my family and, my relationship with God, there were definitely times in my life where I look back and I was struggling the most. That's not true. I wasn't living those priorities, even though I was speaking them. And that's where I wish someone had taught me that you have to have boundaries, that saying no is so good for us, that knowing where and when we can put our energy and putting restraints around that is a blessing, and it's a good thing. And it makes you a good parent. It makes you a good leader. It makes you a good friend.
I'm going to take a couple things. You want to go on this journey with me? We're going to circle back around. We're going to circle back around. We're going to talk about your family. We're going to talk about a little bit of mutual connection. You live in Omaha. There's some cows in Omaha. There's some agriculture. I have cows. A couple weeks ago, you and I had a conversation. And after that conversation, I traveled to Orlando for a conference. And when I was in Orlando, I get a call. And I have some cows. And the cows were no longer in the pasture they were supposed to be in. And the reason why is one of them, she decided that the boundary that kept her safe, she no longer regarded. It was an electric fence. This isn't to, go through animal, whatever. It's just that boundary was there to keep her from wandering off to get hurt. You might think about it like a dog. Like we have a dog. We have a little Bernedoodle. Right. And we have an invisible fence. And the reason we have an invisible fence is because we live in the country and we have coyotes and there's, cougars, there's other things. What does that fence do? That fence keeps her from going where she isn't. Now, this cow that I have, she decided the fence didn't matter to her anymore. And so even though it was electrified, it wasn't enough. And she'd just go through it. It's like could care less. So I had to do some retraining when I got home. And we've had to do that with our dog too, at times of and this is my preference. If you put in an offense, you make it really, really strong. So that way I never want to go there again. Now I'm going to use that story, that experience. I had to do that. And it was helpful because now she hasn't gone anywhere. She hasn't gotten out. I haven't had to worry about chasing her up and down the street. And I think back about the story of your son. And I hope we can connect here. I hope it's fine and good. You shared, and I know you just took your son to college, right? And if we think about the experience I just shared about cows, and I'm going to relate it to your son, and my hope is as a leader with boundaries that we set the boundary there for ourselves and or others as an example, and sometimes show, hey, if you go through the fence, it could hurt. And having that boundary, though, even though it may hurt sometimes, actually keeps us safe. And if I, again, connecting all this and I think about the experience of yourself and your son and thinking, all right, what fence have I helped put around him?
Mhm.
And at some point, you have to trust that that fence is going to do its job.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And, it's funny because someone once said to me that, I was coaching a client, and she was saying how she has great boundaries at work and she has really clear boundaries. But when she gets home, she doesn't have any boundaries with her kids because she loves her kids and she loves her family. And she just feels like she has to be there for them all the time. So she was really having a difficult time creating any time for herself at home because she always, there was no spaces that were off limits. There were no times that were off limits. She's like, I'm always available for my kids. And I said, one of the things that someone said to me once that was so convicting was, don't you want to raise kids with boundaries? Don't you want to model boundaries for your kids? And if you're a parent who never has any boundaries with them, they don't understand boundaries, and they think that they should not have boundaries themselves. And so that struck me, and I thought, okay, I want my kids to see me saying no. I want my kids to hear me saying no to them. I want my kids to hear me saying, like, we're not going to do that because that's going to make us all exhausted, or we don't have the finances to do that, or we're not doing this because that is going to lead to an unhealthy behavior, or I need like an hour to myself. Do not bother me for the next hour. There's actually nothing wrong with being a boundaried parent, because I can tell you, I have a 14-year-old daughter, by far has the best boundaries of anyone in our house. And she, if we will all be going out to, let's say, watch a football game and go to dinner on a Friday night, and Soph will literally say, I'm not doing that. I'm tired. I've had a long week. I'm going to stay home, paint my nails, and do my homework for next week and go to bed early. Don't bother me. And I'm like, what? Like, don't you want to come out with us? And then I realized she is stating her boundaries. She knows what she needs for her own health and mental health and rest and physical health. And she's saying, I'm not doing that. And I love that about her. Like, I want all of my kids to feel, I want my son that I just dropped off at college to be like, I'm not doing that. Not good for me, not good for my mental health or my physical health or my spiritual health. I'm putting a boundary there. And the only way that we can teach our kids that is not to be the parent that does everything and gives them everything and is there for them, quote unquote, all the time, right? But actually teaches them and models that for them.
I think about my cow.
Yeah.
And what I had, I mean, and literally, the fence was there to protect her. And it was my negligence that it wasn't proper. So it didn't give her the consequence that I needed to make sure she was safe. And I think as you describe that as a parent, as a leader, as just a person in relationships, if we don't draw that line, it becomes real blurred. And the consequence may still be there, but if you don't draw it, then the consequence is not going to be impactful on others. You shared a story especially in your medical career. And I know being on call, that varied a lot of times. And sometimes it would, be days that you weren't on call and you would answer things. And, I know from experience and having a career where I was on call 24/7, you kind of train people that, oh, I want to be there to always serve you. But you almost have to train people to say, no, unless it's an emergency, unless it's dire, here's the protocol. Explain that process. How did you evolve through that? And then how did you then help others see your boundaries and create a win for themselves?
I think it's really important as leaders that we understand how we go through our day, whether that's answering an email, answering a phone call, responding to a text message, if we're on vacation, if we're at dinner with our family, we are modeling the behavior that, even if we don't say it, that everyone else thinks they have to adopt. So what was happening to me is I would answer emails, texts, calls, all hours of the night, whether I was on call or not. And it fed my ego, number one. It made me feel good that I was needed, Number two, it made me feel that I was being a good colleague. I was being a servant leader. I had no idea of the unintended consequences. So when I'm at the beach with my family, but I'm responding to 7 emails, what all of the people that I'm leading are seeing is this is the expectation. So then if they're on vacation and I send them an email, they think they have to respond. So once I recognize that I cannot get angry at someone for emailing me on this week of vacation and expecting an answer, when I emailed them back up to 6 months ago when I was on vacation, they don't know that maybe this is a more special vacation, or maybe I'm doing something. So I've set a boundary for myself. The boundary is on me, that I don't answer emails or text messages at night or weekends or on vacation. I model this for my people. And I do this, like, even there is a little saying at the bottom of my email that says, if you receive this and you're on vacation or it's an evening or weekend, please do not respond till the next day, because I don't want people to think that that's a normal behavior that I expect of everyone. And that boundary starts with me. And so in the book, I really talk about how the biggest boundaries we have to set are with ourselves and our own patterns and behaviors, especially as leaders.
So one thing that just hit me, and I'm thinking about, your organization Brave Enough, and it's, that cause to, really all those things encompass. Obviously brave fits into boundaries. It's the next part of it. But where does that bravery really come from in the whole boundaries aspect?
For me, it's the courage to express your boundaries to others and to identify those pain points in your life where you lack boundaries and it makes you feel good because everybody likes you, or you're pleasing everybody, or you're getting that, like, oh, only Tyler can do that, so we're going to wait till he's back to do that. Or, oh, Tyler will have the answer, we're going to call him. It really does feed our ego, and we can act like, oh, we're being servants or whatever, but it truly taps in to an unhealthy, complimenting your ego and just building this up, which never results in good behavior. Like when we act out of our ego, it never results in good behavior. And so what I think the courage comes from is being brave enough to disappoint nice people, to being brave enough and courageous enough to be transparent with the people that we are closest with and say, I tell a funny story in the book about skiing with my family and going up this huge, tall mountain, getting off the ski lift at the top. And I was with my oldest 2 boys and my husband, and everything in my body, in my brain was saying, don't ski down this mountain. Don't go down the mountain. Like, danger, there is a broken bone and an orthopedic procedure in your future. And my boys were like, super pumped, and my husband's like ready to go. And I was so afraid of saying, I don't want to go down this hill, to the 3 people that probably love me the most in life. And I just was finally like, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. So I said, I'm not going down the mountain. And they looked at me and they're like, what? And I'm like, I'm not going. I'm out. I'm not doing this. And they were like, really, Mom? And I'm like, go. I'm not doing this. And I tell the story. I'm like, honestly, it was one of the most courageous moments of my life, was saying no to my boys and my husband to ski down a mountain, because I had this thought, like, they're going to be disappointed in me, and they've been waiting to do this for a year, and they think I'm a cool mom because I can ski, and I'm saying no to this hard run. And I just said no, and I set the boundary. And I talk about in the book how the people that we are closest with take the most courage to share our boundaries. But when we do, we can become a psychological safe place for others. And we have such a deeper relationship with them, because what we're saying is, when you don't want to do something that I want you to do, you can share that with me and I'm going to love you anyway.
Yes.
And so having courage, and the reason I called it my book, Brave Boundaries, is because this is not what we are taught to do in society. We are not taught to disappoint people. We are not taught to say no to people we like. We're not taught to be transparent and say things like, I've had a really crappy long week and I'm feeling emotionally depleted, or I have not seen my kids in 5 days. I know I told you I was going to be able to make dinner tonight, but right now, today, I cannot do that because it is not the best thing for my family. We're not taught to do that, Tyler. We are taught to just show up, put a smile on our face, and become more and more burned out or become more and more distant in our relationship. So brave boundaries take courage.
Well, the thing that I am reflecting on there is, you know, it's really, it's two steps forward to gain two other steps.
Mm,
And it's if I'm setting boundaries, then I'm again reiterating and iterating to others, please make me aware of your boundaries. I think there's so much, especially in relationships. It's, you know, personal relationships, it's professional work relationships. There's this constant like navigation of how do I fit here? Where do I fit? What do I do to fit? And I think where in many cases it gets difficult is when there's not clear identifiers. You may have values, you may have, you know, a code of ethics, but without boundaries, it gets real wishy-washy. And
mhm,
I've had this in my own experience professionally and personally, where it's like, you know, there's almost comes a point of manipulation, but it's use of shame to say, oh, if you really, you know, if you really cared about the hospital, if you really cared about your
mhm,
patients, you would answer. If
mhm,
you really cared about me, you would do X, Y, and Z as in the opposite of saying, I care about you. So therefore I've put regulations around what I will and won't do, because I recognize if I don't do that,
mhm,
then coming back to the whole river, I become a puddle,
mhm.
and a puddle
100%.
just is a mess.
Yes. Yes. And, don't you like, for example, let's take this podcast. I love this podcast. I think your work that you do is phenomenal. I love following you on social. If you don't follow him on social, make sure you do, because you will learn something with every post. You will leave encouraged, positive, totally of a positive voice for me. And I have cultivate my feed. So I get asked to go on podcasts all the time. And I have boundaries around podcasts even, because I'm like, don't you want to know that when I show up on your podcast,
How
I'm
many times have you been on? Four times.
this is it. This is the
Okay.
record.
All right. Hey, there you go.
But like, I want to show up on a podcast and hang with a person for an hour that I really am going to be engaged with. Not, if I did every podcast that came my way, I would have 50% of the energy that I have, And so it's the same thing when we set boundaries around our time and energy. We show up more fully for people. And, we have this like ideation, this false belief that if we tell someone no, they're never going to ask us again, or they're going to, poison the water, or they're going to have a bad thought about us. And the truth is that is mostly 100% in our mind. Most people, when you tell them no, or when you say, I'm sorry, I can't do that, or when you say, thank you for the ask, but I'm unable to show up for that, they express disappointment, which is actually a compliment. In about 30 seconds, they're on to the next thing. We may be ruminating about it, but they're on to the next thing. I mean, I am a researcher and I write papers and I write research, and I often have a writing team, and I will ask other people to write with me. And I often ask people more junior than me to write with me so they can get some experience. And I love the junior faculty that has enough awareness to say no, because that tells me that when they say yes, they're all in. The
Mm-hmm.
people who say yes to everything and then don't actually show up and want to do the work, or don't do the work, or
It's annoying.
it's annoying. So,
Yeah.
they always like are afraid to tell me no. And I'm like, actually, if you tell me no, that tells me that you have good time management, that you know what you can and cannot do, and that you are a person, when you say yes, you show up for the work. So I think it's so important that we like recognize that actually when we say no, then it allows us to say yes to the things that we really want to be at, and show up fully and
Yeah.
give all of our energy.
Yeah. It's the ideal. Make your yeses yeses and your
Mhm.
nos nos.
Yeah.
Um, there's the I don't know, the continued current in all of this is that Instead of thinking I need to do more, I need to do less, but at a higher capacity. And it's understanding that, which is so hard when you're trying to establish and understand your value. And the other piece there that I think about is part of expressing what we value and what value we either understand and can bring is by communication. In other words, if I would have asked, go back to you being a guest. If I said, "Hey, Sasha, would you, be a guest?" And you're like, "Hey, Tyler, I'd love to. I'm sorry, it doesn't fit. This is what I've allotted, whatever." Great. Thank you for explaining that to me. And that extra communication to me actually enhances our relationship as opposed to, "Oh, no. Well,
Right.
well, tell me more. Help me understand. I want to grow and learn." And I think as a leader, as you're talking about working with, junior researchers, and if they tell you, "No, I can't do it." And you're like, "Okay, well, like, give me a little bit more." Like, is it
Hmm.
because you have too much on your plate? You're not interested in this. So next time I can understand your boundaries. So I
Hmm.
can either not ask because that's past, over, going over your boundaries, or, oh, this actually fits in her boundaries.
Hmm.
Yes, I want to write about, the different types of anesthesia to use during different procedures, as opposed to, I don't like that stuff. I'm just doing it because I want to do research. Well, thank you.
Right.
That helps me, right?
Yes. Yes. And, I will say this, there is something called that I talk about in the book called boundary backlash, that a lot of times, once in a while, not always, but when you express your boundaries to someone, like you said, they may be shocked or they may be confused or they may be actually frustrated. And most of the time it's because you haven't explained the boundary. So you haven't explained why, or they themselves wish they had the boundary. And they're like, "I didn't know I could say no to that." So this happens to me quite a lot. I will say, I'm not going to do that, but thank you for asking. And someone else will be like, "Well, why does she get to say no?" And I'm like, they're like, "We've been doing this for years. We didn't know we had an option." So many times it's not at you. It may feel like it's coming at you, but you're just educating people on boundaries and the options for boundaries. I coach a lot of women through pay gap and trying to decrease the pay gap between men and women in medicine. It's pretty significant in medicine. And oftentimes it is because women are asked to do things without pay, and they don't realize they can say no. They can say, "I would love to do that if there is salary support for it." So they just say, "Sure," hoping that like in 5 years, someone's going to come down and be like, "Oh, you've been doing this for 5 years. We're now suddenly going to pay you for it," which never happens. So I'm like, men are actually, I think, a lot better at setting boundaries and saying like, "Yeah, I'd love to do that job. Where is the salary support?" So I teach a lot of women, like, you can set a boundary around unpaid work. You can also set a boundary around, expectations of you that are outside your job description. I don't think a lot of people do realize this. And actually, bosses like people like that because it's very transparent. They
Hmm.
know what they're doing. They understand their job description. I mean, I know I employ people. I love the people that are like, "Am I supposed to do that? Is that my job?" Or, "No, that's this person's job." Like, you want those boundaries. Those boundaries bring transparency and clarity, which brings ease and efficiency to our workplaces.
The the interesting aspect there to me is understanding how we get there. You
Mm.
talk about we'll use the pay discrepancy,
Mhm.
right? That's driven by a culture of not having those boundaries.
Mhm.
It's that, oh, well, we've gotten away with this, or this is the way that the operation has gone. This is just
Yes.
the industry in and of itself. So that becomes the expectation. And you talk about that backlash. Sometimes that backlash is is healthy because it helps everyone else move forward. And to me, there's probably an amount of bravery and
Mm.
courageousness that says,
Mhm.
if I don't do this, I'm actually not only setting myself back, I'm setting everyone else around me and future generations back.
Mhm.
And that responsibility, to me, that's much of a leadership ethos, is like, hey, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for everyone else, which is going to help all of us.
Yes.
And I think that by modeling it, it takes everyone forward to a place that we couldn't get without boundaries.
Mhm. Yes. And that's what boundaries have been so radical for me in my work life and extended into my home life, both places, because I recognize that if I don't know what my own boundaries are, how can I expect my boss to know what my boundaries are?
Yeah.
Like, how can I expect my husband to know what my boundaries are if I don't know what they are for myself? Like, we can't read each other's minds, And so, for example, I talk about this in the book about how when the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden everybody's at home, right? I don't know if this was like you have teenagers. I'm sure it was like this in your house, but did your grocery bill just triple? I was like, where has everyone been eating? Because now everyone is eating from the refrigerator and there's no food. I'm like, where have all these people been getting food? Because clearly you haven't starved for the last 10 years, but there's no food in our house ever. And so I started cooking meals and I was like, this is great. I'm not we're not at basketball and soccer and, football and dance every night. And we're all eating family meals. And that lasted about 2 months. And then I was like, okay, people, I am not a short order chef. I am not making homemade sourdough bread anymore. I don't know why I even started. I'm throwing away the starter kit. Figure out, it just became this thing, every night, what's for dinner? And I thought I was going to punch the next person that asked me that. And then I set a boundary and I was like, okay, I love that we're all home. I love that we're all eating together, but mama's cooking 3 days a week, 3 days a week. You're all people that have feet and hands and can walk into the pantry and make cereal for dinner if you want. You're getting something cooked for you 3 times a week. And that is it. And I got my nights back, but I was like, what am I doing? Why am I assuming this role that I don't want? But it really comes down to boundaries. I had to set a boundary with myself. And I think so many times we just are too afraid to set boundaries that other people will respect around us, but they can't read our minds and go, oh, you're tired of cooking dinner every night, so we're going to do this for you. No, I had to say, no more meals on wheels every night at 6 p.m. Figure it out for yourself the other 4 days a week.
Yeah. As I'm thinking here, you tactically understood that decision. You said, all right, time out. I know what I can and can't do. This is what I'm going to do. I know there's people listening that they're like, how do I do that? I don't even recognize how frazzled I am. I'm just trying to get through life. Right? There's times I remember when your kids are little, my kids were little, I'm just trying to get through life.
Yeah.
And I may not be able to even start the idea of boundaries, but I have to think the sooner you start thinking about what boundaries do you have, you're going to then move into a place to where you can set those boundaries. Mm-hmm. So what's the process there for people, both professional and personal, to kind of start into that process?
So the first thing I talk about is a boundary model, and it's a 4-step process that's super easy. And the first question is, what do I know to be true? So let's use my dinner example. What do I know to be true? I am feeling extreme pressure to cook dinner for these people every night. I am tired of it, and it's becoming a negative. Something good that I like doing is becoming negative. So what do I know to be true? And then the second question is, what is the boundary needed? The boundary is around how many times a week I'm going to cook dinner. Then the third is, who needs to hear the boundary, right? Who needs to hear it? Other people. Other people need to hear it. It's not a boundary that can live in my head. I need to tell the family
that's where everyone gets in trouble.
That's where everyone gets in trouble, because what we do is we start thinking, and I have these thoughts, if they loved me, they would know that I'm tired. If they really appreciated me, they would offer to cook. If my husband really loved me, he would know this is burning me out. I had all these stupid ideations, right? So once
I've been told those things.
Once I said, I'm not cooking, I realized like, oh, I have to share the boundary with others. And then the fourth is going through the process of actually setting a time and a date to share the boundary. Because a boundary that lives in your head is not a boundary. You have to share it with others. So it's super easy. But the biggest question is, what do I know to be true? It's so simple, but it honestly makes yourself get to the root of the problem. Because, you know, you can go a lot deeper. Like I could have went down like, oh my gosh, I am living in a misogynistic family who thinks that the woman should cook the dinner. I mean, I could have went all these ways that are not true. The truth is everybody loves my cooking. They're all super thankful. They love it. They eat it, but it was burning me out and I don't need to do it for 7 days a week to be a good mom. So, you know, I just needed to say, y'all, this is making me tired. I'm going to do this 3 days a week. And everybody was like, okay. Nobody was complaining. Nobody was upset about it. All of those fears were in my head that I was going to disappoint them and let them down. So that's the boundary model. And I talk about it in the book.
Man, you just tapped into something there. In the time that we've talked last, I had another interview podcast with a guy named Lucas Jaden, and it actually comes out. We're recording this on a Tuesday. It comes out Friday this week. It is what it is. And in the book, it's called The Twin Thieves. Great book. And there's 2 topics in there that they identify are the twin thieves. And you just touched on them. And I have to think it's amazing how it continues to show up. It's the fear of failure and the fear of judgment. And when we're talking about this, and I just, that moment that you said about, you know, what are they going to think if I set this boundary, is the fear of judgment. Is if I set this, are they going to think I am failing them? If I set this, you know, if I actually admit, you know, it's what do I know to be true? If I actually go through and answer that, what is my fear? That I either let people down, I failed in it, I didn't do my job, going back to, you know, in residency and all those things, all those demands on you. If I don't attend to this, am I going to fail? Or that second one of, what are they going to think about me?
The judgment. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sitting, I'm looking at the book. I'm just going to hold it up to you. It's right here. I'm looking at it, not to take away from your book, right? We're talking brave boundaries.
No, I love it. I love, you know how I support all authors because I think it's so hard to write a book.
And it's this, I have to just think now that the biggest issue that we have answering that first question is, what are other people going to think? And what am I going to think of myself?
Yes. 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 You know, and like I always say, it is not hard to say no to people you don't like.
Oh yeah. Right.
Like, nope, not doing that. But it is so hard to disappoint nice people. It is. But if you want to have wellness and balance in your life at all, if you want to live your priorities, it's as simple as this. You're going to have to disappoint nice people at some time or another. If you think you're going to go through your whole life and never disappoint people that you like, or never say no to people that you like, or never disappoint them, you are going to be the most unhappy person on the planet, because you're constantly living for people pleasing and stroking your ego, which is not a good thing, actually.
I'm going to take a twist on that. We disappoint when we don't meet expectations. And so disappointment comes from unmet expectations. Boundaries set expectations. So boundaries, in my opinion, actually alleviate the potential for disappointment.
Yes. Yes. Yes, that's so good because, you know, I look back to things that I have done without boundaries, and I honestly maybe have given 60% to some efforts, and I still have guilt about it, right? Like projects or papers or people. And I'm like, man, I just didn't show up for them. I had this going on and this going on and this going on. I can make excuses, but it all really comes down to my boundaries, because I still said yes, even though I was exhausted, overwhelmed, over functioning. And that's on me. That's not on them for asking. You know, I tell women all the time that I coach who are like, oh, I got asked to do this thing again. And I'm like, first of all, be happy that you were asked. If you were asked to do something, that means you are a woman who shows up. You are a person who someone trusts. Doesn't mean you have to say yes. Don't get mad at the ask, because what you're saying is you have to say yes then to every ask, and you don't. Set boundaries, know your limits, know how many times you can speak a year, know how many times you can work on projects outside of your current projects. Know how many hours you want to spend working each week. Know how many when you're going to answer emails and texts and all that. That is something that we can control. And those are boundaries that are so meaningful, because like you said, then you're not disappointing people when you show up and do the work that you say you're going to do.
You know, a lot of the things that you've heard me talk about, we've talked about together is insecurities. And that's what I had to really unmask. And that's something that I believe is the greatest barrier in leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, as we wrap this up at talking about boundaries, is the process of setting boundaries actually help, I would say, break down, you know, really kind of set aside, create this, like, I'm looking for the right word, and excuse me for not having it, but this idea that when I set boundaries, it actually helps inform me of what some of my insecurities are, and makes me actually be healthy about them and be more authentic to my insecurities, to where my insecurities don't start to overtake me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And, you know, that is such a insightful way to look at boundaries, because as a way for self-growth, I think is what you're saying, a way to grow out of some of our insecurities, because we all laugh about FOMO, you know, fear of missing out. But I think, like, I know so many people who do things because they have FOMO. But then if you talk to them, they're too busy. They're way too overscheduled. They're over functioning. They may not even want to do it, but they're so afraid of missing out. And I'm like, that I've had to learn that insecurity. Like, you know, social media makes everything look like the best parts of ourselves, right? And so, and it showcases when we're not at something, or when we've missed something, we know we've missed it. When many times, you know, before social media, somebody was having a party, we wouldn't know that we weren't even invited, right? Or we didn't know we weren't.
Talk about issues with teenagers.
Yes, exactly. And I'm like, okay, when I get triggered by something that I missed, that I see on social media, or I wasn't involved in, or I wasn't asked to do, or that I said no to, I ask myself, like, where is this coming from? And it's almost always insecurity and my ego. And then I have to just ask myself, what do I know to be true? What do I know to be true? My value doesn't come from how many talks I give, or how many followers I have, or whether or not I got invited to something. You know, that is not what I want to teach my kids. Their value comes from. That's not where my value comes from. Why am I uncomfortable with this? And it really makes you have to identify the most important things in your life where you want to put your time and energy. If you don't have boundaries, it's like a free-for-all. But having boundaries makes you not only just grow as a person, but it makes you have to, like, think really clearly about what's the most important things in your life that you're going to put that time and energy in.
Man, I love that. Sasha, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, number 4.
Yeah, you know, hey, maybe there'll be number 5 sometime in the future. We'll know.
I hope so.
If you actually, it is actually number 5. Because I was a guest on your podcast.
Yes, you were. So, and you're going to be coming back on soon. I just know this.
Okay.
You don't know it yet, but you're going to be getting an invitation.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much, man. I love the time I get to spend with you every time.
Thank you. It was great. We have such a good conversation.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll chat soon. As Sasha went through the 4 questions, and I'll read them off real quick to you if you didn't have an opportunity to write them down. It's number 1, when you're looking at and establishing, going through boundaries, is, what do I know to be true? We actually talked a little bit about that even more, and how essential that is just for your own security in developing going through your insecurities. That's a big facet to me in becoming an impact-driven leader, is identifying and owning your insecurities. A big piece of that, as I mentioned there as we were wrapping up, is how boundaries fit into that. It's asking the question, what do I know to be true? Number 2, what is the boundary that's needed? Now, quite honestly, you might need help there. Maybe it's someone else offering you, discussing, hey, this is what I know to be true. Seek advice, seek counseling. What boundaries could I put in place? What boundaries are available to me? Number 3 is, who needs to hear it? I think that's so important, is you can go through, what do I know to be true? what boundary can I set in place? But if you never share it, it's like that never happened. It never exists. And then lastly, setting a time and a date to share the boundaries, to walk through them. Now, I think that's an ever-going one. And we discussed that in a little bit is, sharing with people your boundaries does more to build a relationship than it does to cut it off. I believe that. I've seen that. And I know as a leader, that's important to help people with. I, again, thank you for being part of the audience, for subscribing to listen and to give people like Sasha a platform to really share what she's worked through in life, what she's taken her professional career. And I know this, no matter who you are, where you are, there are facets what she shared today that you can absolutely apply to your life. I know that I have and I am, and I encourage you to do the same. Till next time, have a good one. Appreciate you being here.